Okay, I'm gonna be honest. This one has me a wee bit nervous.
What, you are British?
So we're checking out, why do the British look down on Americans? I can think of probably a couple of different things, things that possibly I even do. But I'm not gonna start just listing out everything that I think. Let's hear from actual British about why they look down on us.
How do you feel the British perceive Americans?
I feel like there's quite a lot of, I hate to say it, but mockery involved.
I think a lot of people think Americans are extreme.
Do you think that the British think that they're better
Extreme.
than Americans?
I think some do, yeah.
There's a lot to make fun of, I think.
We're also fantastic at queuing as well. That's another great thing about us.
Rubbing me the wrong way because they're too extra. It doesn't seem like it's genuine.
Today, I'm in London to get to the bottom of a
fair.
very important question.
Americans
For as long
are
as
extra.
I can remember, I have had the sense that the British look down on Americans. This is a generalization, and therefore...
You know what the crazy thing is that from the American point of view, like, I don't think we really look down on any other countries. I know you might have that persona that is kind of out there just in general and in media or something, but, you know, most Americans don't really have negative, like, we don't really look down on foreigners.
For it doesn't apply to everyone, but it's a strong enough trend that I felt I needed to investigate this further. Here's a quote from Prince Harry's memoir, Spare, that perfectly captures the feeling that I have about this. With some, the anti-American sentiment ran very hot. I was reminded of my childhood, when people warned me all the time about Americans. Too loud, too rich, too happy, too confident, too direct, too honest.
Those last three seem like positives. Confident, direct, honest. I mean, too direct, that could come off a little bad, yeah. Too happy, though. Is it bad being happy? I don't know. Obviously, it's like, I'm just messing around. I understand the persona that he's putting out there.
Too happy, too
Whoever wrote
confident,
this.
too direct, too honest.
I'm very curious what people are going to have to say about this. I have a feeling I'm onto something, okay? So, having said that, let's start talking to some people.
Shooting a video for YouTube, could I ask you guys a question? This would be really great. You hate it? Okay, that's
I'm sorry.
Not that easy today, huh?
People are like, I don't want to talk.
Just get a moment.
I've got too much time.
Off to a very slow start. That's okay. Let's just change up the spot because I'm feeling like there's enough projections in that 100-meter radius.
You know, I always feel really terrible that everyone's first attitude is, oh, you're from America, are you? Oh, okay. You know, which is always a bit, you always feel a bit bad about that because I'm not entirely sure why we still do that, but you know.
Yeah. How do you feel perceived as Americans by the British here in London?
A big, stupid, bellowing oaf. Yeah, genuinely. I always feel like I have to apologize for being American. It's like, I know my accent's the worst thing you'll hear today, but can I just order a coffee?
My experience, I feel like, has been a little bit different. I think that might be somewhat informed by the fact that I'm a student here. Okay. At first, there was a bit of a learning curve. Like, when I would speak loudly on the tube, I would kind of get looks, and people would tell me, like, you're being American, like, can you maybe not?
There's definitely
loud.
A sense that there is a lot of difficult things going on in America, and that America potentially could be quite a difficult place to live, especially if you're of colour or from the Middle East.
I have to admit, the inspiration to make this video came when I moved to Europe. As I've explored in previous videos on this channel, many Europeans have mixed to negative views of Americans as dumb and uncultured. But to my surprise, the same goes for the British. I've come to realize that the only people that see the British as intelligent and sophisticated are the Americans. Many
Americans,
Europeans, like the Portuguese or the Spanish, see a very different reality. The British that go off on holiday to get extremely drunk and break things. The British that are isolationist with Brexit. The British that don't learn foreign languages, that stick to their native tongue. Wait a second, I thought to myself. That's what Americans do. Other people do this as well?
How dare they copy us?
I kid, of course. Still, it does feel like the Brits act like the Americans of Europe, but I am certain that is not something that they'd like to hear said about them. I mean, no offense. I am American after all. Does that not prove my point, though? No one wants to stoop to the level of Americans. I felt I had to get my answers directly from the source.
My perception is that the UK is 1 foot in Europe, 1 foot like in the Americas. It feels like it should be in the middle of the Atlantic. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a pretty conclusive idea. But yeah, I think that's definitely true because a lot of people wouldn't even class England as being in Europe. You know, even in England, when you talk about going to Europe, no one ever thinks you mean Doncaster. They always think you mean Germany. You do get some perception that everyone's some sort of like a Valley Girl accent or something like that, and I think that annoys people quite a lot. But then again, it's the same way that English people are often perceived as all sort of being from London. You know, the American dream, making yourself better and being seen to be self-improving, and it's a lot about earning money and being the best you can and going to the gym and all these kind of things.
Do you think that's, are you saying it's positive or negative?
I think it's a positive thing for Americans, but I think the way it's perceived is often everyone goes, oh, get out.
He's still going. I didn't mean to cut him off right there, but that's pretty wild that, like, he's straight up asking him, do you see that as a negative thing? He's like, no, but, like, it's perceived that way. That's crazy.
They probably, no one likes to enjoy someone else's success, at least in England anyway. I think in America it's probably very different. Oh, great, you got a promotion. Fucking bastards, you know.
I think the identity of being American is like such a thing.
Right.
That I don't think other places have that as much.
I don't think people are necessarily dumb, and I don't think it's a question of being dumb. I think it's just that there's this idea of, like, yeah, being the best. To think that, like, people in America, depending on where you're born, you can have access to care or not, it's frightening.
It is pretty crazy, though, that, like, that mentality in America is there, that you can be the best, you can make it, you can do anything you want. That's prevalent. Let's see where else she was going with this.
I don't know how you can speak about being the best when you can't even make sure that everybody's, like, taken care of. Are you treating everyone the same way in America? No, not everyone is treated the same way, just like not everyone is treated the same way in Europe.
It's kind of crazy for her to say that, like, not actually being an American and saying that not everyone is treated the same way. I'm sure just like other countries, like, the perception that we get from your country is usually something that is put out there by some style or some type of media, you know, and kind of the same thing. Like, I'm sure you guys have seen dozens of headlines that there's race issues in America, and, like, some of that is there, but for the most part, everyone just gets along really well. Like, I don't know, it's not as blown out of proportion as everything always seems from, like, a headline. You know, that makes sense? I'm sure it goes all the way around the entire world. We're always being fed some type of narrative that we're not, you know, we take it as truth, but we're not 100% sure.
Having been to America a lot, they often ask, obviously as a joke, but just like, do you know the royal family or anything like that?
So do you feel that generally, this big generalization, there's mockery towards the Americans and Americans towards the British is more like cute. We think you're cute.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah.
How do you feel about Americans thinking you're cute?
Well, it can be taken as a compliment, obviously, but if they think that we're, like, as a country, not really a force to be reckoned with, then just because we do all these, like, things that date back to long before the US was established, it's not really relevant that they can mock us for that.
Is it condescending, would you say?
A little bit.
Or ignorant?
More ignorant. It doesn't, like, hurt me.
How do you feel Americans perceive the British, first of all?
It's just the British accent. It's just...
You feel that?
I feel like Americans
seems so nice.
Like they're on top of everything, and there's always competition between the two.
So do you feel like the British have a chip on their shoulder a little bit because of that?
Yeah, a lot.
What do you think the British are better at than Americans?
Yeah, polite, really.
More polite?
Yeah, more talkative, more helpful.
More polite.
More helpful. The British are more helpful.
Yeah, than Americans. But Americans
That's awesome.
Funny, got
True.
Good music.
Got good music, okay. Well, the British have good music too, man.
Americans are taking over the music scene.
But I mean, come on, there's a lot of great British music.
So here's the thing that I think is going on here. We are not the same, the Brits and the Americans, but we sure have a lot of similarities. Compare us to the Japanese or to Native Americans or to Ethiopians, and the differences between Americans and the British seems relatively small. We're like blood siblings in the village that is the globe.
So here's what all of this started to make me think of. There's a concept in psychoanalysis, I'm going to read you the definition, but it's called the narcissism of small differences. This comes from Freud.
The narcissism of small differences is the idea that the more a relationship or community shares commonalities, the more likely the people in it are to engage in interpersonal feuds and mutual ridicule because of hypersensitivity to minor differences perceived in each other. We see this all over the world, between the Argentinians and the Chileans, for example, between the French and the Belgians. And indeed, I think this is what is happening between the Brits and the Americans. But at the end of the day, I feel like we make the little things that make us different much bigger than they really are.
The way that we speak and the words that we use.
Yeah.
And again, we were talking about this, weren't we?
Yeah.
About
we were
certain
talking
words.
about things like autumn versus fall. And it's like that's often something that people like bring up. And for some, well, it's because it's a simpler word. And it's like, fall, American.
You guys don't say
classic.
fall?
No, we don't say fall. We
Oh,
say
interesting.
autumn.
Okay.
Autumn.
This is autumn. Not fall.
But
Some Americans say autumn. I like saying autumn. It sounds better than fall. I don't know. I love fall too. I use both. So
personally, when I come to the UK, I have the impression that I've come halfway across the Atlantic. I'm not just off the coast of continental Europe. And by that I mean, culturally, it feels so much more similar to the life that I had in the US. The convenience of life, the speed, the capitalism, the language.
Everyone speaks English. Everyone's like got the same sort of core values. I'm not necessarily a big Christian person at all, but we all come from this like Christian-based countries. America and Australia are English. There's some things that happen in history, but at the end of the day, we're kind of all the same group of people in that regard.
Culturally,
the two countries that I could go to that I would assimilate to the quickest would definitely be England and Australia. So he's right there. You know, not saying that that's what I would want, but if I just going off of feelings, like what would I easily kind of like blend into would be those two.
Culturally influenced by the same group. So I personally don't see many differences at all.
I mean, I've got wonderful American friends who I adore, so that question for me is a difficult one because I think they're great, they're fantastic. Yeah. I think the differences in the way our language is, in the way we use different words, that's where there's a difference.
So pretty minor.
Yeah.
Do you think that sometimes some of the British media or the portion of the British population that looks down on Americans, is it a way to deflect some of the issues that exist here? Could that be said of all societies?
Yeah, you can say that of all societies, but you can also say that about the media. They're always distracting, aren't they, from topics, whatever it is.
America's seen as very alpha male. If you think about it in terms of masculine and feminine, there's an alpha maleness to Americans. And maybe it's just the way they speak,
there is.
the accent, but you don't really have that sense of Britain. I think
there hasn't been a lot of that as of late, but it seems to be coming back again.
Stereotype of the repressed male, that soft-spoken.
Considering we're like right on the edge of Europe, we have more in common with America in many ways than we do with the rest of Europe, which in theory is where we should be more aligned. And I think
that's
sort of
wild
something that can feel sort of slight.
An average British person thinks that too. That's crazy. I never thought that they would say
slightly odd about that, you know, like with the whole Brexit thing, breaking away more from where we're most closely connected to and sort of being in a situation where, you know, we're going to end up with chlorinated chicken instead.
There's this tendency to think of Americans as just, you know, they're simplistic, really.
Are you like annoyed by the Americans here in
Sometimes.
I was going to say, she for sure is.
Now, the interesting thing is I love to drag the U.S. through the mud and criticize it for all the things that I think it deserves criticism for. But the second the Brits start criticizing me or the U.S., you have nothing to say. Kind of like I can criticize where I grew up, but you aren't allowed to. And the British, in my opinion, are doing their version of the same thing, criticizing themselves to no end, but no one wants an outside opinion. Maybe we all do this. I think we all do this. It's like pointing at someone else's flooding house when your own house is on fire.
So,
dude, kudos to this guy that made this video. I'm gonna subscribe to him really quick. Nathaniel, he's making an awesome video here. Really hitting some good points.
I lived in America for 6 years. I lived in California, Alabama, and Oklahoma for 3 years. Everyone hears my accent and is like, oh, where in America are you from? I'm like, well, I'm actually from Australia, but then they give me their little opinions on American stuff. So I've actually had to play defense a couple times since I've been out here.
Are you serious?
I'm so serious. Because they talk about guns or they talk about this, but they don't have like a very good understanding, not just English people, just people around the world, even in Australia, of the history of America and why those things became what they were. People trying to, you know, throw rocks and then hide their hands.
Yeah.
They don't want the blame to be on them, so it's easy to put it on the big superpower that is on everyone's TV.
Oh, gosh, that guy, God bless him. But yeah, he is right that, like, I even play defense, like, in the comments section on my channel sometimes, because I'm like, I feel like I'm on the defense just for being an American, so it's interesting. He was right, though.
I don't consider Americans necessarily lesser in terms of, like, lifestyle, culture, per se. I just think it's a bit more apparent than it is in the UK, but the UK is just as problematic.
There's always sort of a sense in the past that, like, America was sort of, you know, 2 decades ahead of what was happening in this country. There is a sense that we're getting closer in a time frame.
I would say younger generations
interesting.
tend to be a bit more, and the only word I can think of it is shameful of the heritage. I think it's a lot of things from like colonialization and things like that. There tends to be a lot more shame around it.
We're a small island, right? So we've got a small island mentality, but because we've got a small island mentality, we've got to overcome it by kind of that impression that we're the best. And I think that's changing, though. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a total reflection of society now, but I think historically it has been, of course. Let's flip the question. How are Americans perceiving the British?
My answer to that is there is a power dynamic going on, and for better or for worse, the U.S. is much more of a world superpower right now. So I don't think that the US feels threatened necessarily, like competitive with Great Britain. Because of that, I think there's kind of like a, they're cute, you know what I mean? Like they're
keeps
Harry
using
Potter
they're
and
cute.
James Bond and sophisticated and...
Sophisticated, that is a great word. That is, yeah, when you think of a British person as an American, it's kind of, yeah.
Use words like autumn.
Exactly. But I also think that there's also a major degree of ignorance. Like the US is so self-involved. We're not even paying attention to what's going on elsewhere in the world. So there's not even enough to form an opinion, you know?
Now, this video was definitely supposed to be in good.
And I'm hoping that I can get more Americans to watch my channel as I explore more of Europe and learn more about other cultures and people, because it's super interesting to me. I hope I get some American viewers. Let me know if any are all in there. I think it's pretty small.
Video was definitely supposed to be in good fun. I harbor no ill will towards the British. I find our rivalries as human beings across cultures, across nations, to be comical and interesting. It's like an insight into human psychology. And despite all of the, criticizing going on here, I'd like to end on a positive note. I'd like to express my appreciation for a few things that I think the British do better than Americans. Your healthcare system, for one. Also, the Premier League. They say football was invented in England, and if that is true, as someone with Argentinian background, I can only thank you. I also have to thank you for your incredible music. What a contribution to our collective heritage.
Oh, the
It
music.
is a foreign idea to me to have a royal family, but I
Coldplay's
respect
British?
the commitment to tradition.
But I did move here the week that the Queen died, so it was really interesting to see. I think my first impression of like the British as a public was that of like mourning for their Queen. The 14-hour-long line to go see her lying in state.
That would be the wildest culture shock. It's like having a queen and like a royal family. So
I think it was a little bit of a
that's-
shock.
yeah,
this might
that
sound
would be
silly,
weird.
but how procedural the British can be. I noticed that tends to be, like every British person I've met, tends to be very procedural. As opposed to Americans, I think are a little bit more, like, dare I say, free-spirited or individualistic. So, I mean, I think that's not to say that one is better than the other.
And as a final note, we are obviously a world of individuals, and so stereotypes never fully work. Still, I find it so fascinating to explore the stereotypes and cliches that we have for one another. Not always, but often there is some sort of basis of truth there, or else they wouldn't spread and persist as they do. Anyway, having said all of that, I hope you enjoyed this video.
Yeah.
And if you did, please consider liking it, which
All right, you guys, check out Nathaniel Drew. Great video by him. Yeah, I got a lot out of that. Happy it came across my feed, and I'm happy you guys stopped in and watched it and checked it out with me. I will see you in the next one. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button on the way out, and that's it. Peace.